Sometimes the most important characters in raising Kanan aren't the loudest. They aren't the ones starting wars or making headlines. They're the people standing quietly in the background, waiting for the right moment to matter. That brings us to Garcia. At first glance, Garcia doesn't seem like someone who would completely change Jukebox's story. In fact, most fans are focused on bigger names like Rack, Marvin, Kanan, Breeze, and Stefano. But if you've been paying close attention to Season 5, you may have noticed that Garcia's presence feels more deliberate than accidental. What if Garcia isn't just another supporting character? What if he's being positioned as someone who could become one of Jukebox's most important allies? Not a romantic interest. Not someone who suddenly changes the entire story overnight. But someone who could help Jukebox survive the increasingly dangerous world around her. Let's break down why this theory could make sense. One thing that separates Jukebox from many of the other characters is how isolated she has become. She's surrounded by family, yet she often feels alone. She has people who care about her, but very few who truly understand what she's carrying emotionally. Season 5 continues exploring that loneliness. After everything she's experienced, Jukebox has become more cautious about who she lets into her life. She's learned that trusting the wrong person usually comes with consequences. That makes every new relationship important. Not because she's looking for someone to rescue her, but because genuine allies are becoming harder to find. One thing that stands out about Garcia is that he doesn't appear to be driven by ego. Unlike many characters in Raising Kanan, he isn't constantly trying to prove he's the toughest person in the room. He listens. He observes. He seems to think before acting. That's an interesting contrast to the chaos surrounding so many of the show's major players. Jukebox has spent years dealing with people who wanted something from her. Garcia feels different. That difference could eventually matter. Season 5 has made one thing very clear. Nobody knows who they can fully trust anymore. Rack is navigating uncertain partnerships. Kanan is finding new mentors. Marvin is consumed by grief. Even long-standing alliances feel fragile. In a world like that, trust becomes more valuable than power. If Garcia proves himself reliable over time, Jukebox may begin seeing him as someone she can depend on. That doesn't happen quickly in this series. And it shouldn't. The writers usually allow relationships to develop naturally. This is where I think some theories get it wrong. Jukebox isn't waiting for someone to save her. She's one of the strongest and most capable characters in the series. She's intelligent. She's observant. She knows how dangerous this world can be. What she needs isn't a hero. She needs someone who respects her independence while still having her back when things become difficult. Garcia could potentially fill that role, not by taking over her story, but by standing beside her when she has no reason to trust anyone else. Most of the people in Jukebox's life are connected to the ongoing conflicts surrounding the Thomas family. Every conversation eventually leads back to business, loyalty, or revenge. Garcia could represent something different. A calmer perspective. A voice that isn't constantly pushing her toward another confrontation. That doesn't mean he'll always agree with her. Sometimes the best allies are the people willing to challenge your thinking instead of simply telling you what you want to hear. One thing I've appreciated this season is that Jukebox's story isn't entirely defined by her family anymore. She's beginning to make choices based on her own future. That's an important step in her development. As characters become more independent, the show naturally introduces new relationships that reflect those changes. Garcia could simply be another part of that evolution. Someone connected to Jukebox's future rather than her past. If you've watched Raising Kanan from the beginning, you know the writers rarely rush major relationships. Whether it's friendships, family dynamics, or rivalries, everything develops over time. That's why Garcia's role feels interesting. The writers aren't forcing viewers to pay attention to him. Instead, they're allowing him to quietly become more relevant. Sometimes that's exactly how the most meaningful characters are introduced. Throughout the series, Jukebox often feels like she's wearing emotional armor. She has to stay strong. She has to stay alert. She has to be careful about showing vulnerability. Living that way becomes exhausting. If Garcia becomes someone she can genuinely relax around, that alone would make him important. Not because it changes who she is, because it gives viewers a chance to see another side of her personality. Those quieter moments often become some of the most memorable scenes in television. Another possibility is that Garcia's importance isn't emotional at all. It could be practical. As tensions continue rising throughout Season 5, information becomes increasingly valuable. Knowing who's moving against whom, understanding which alliances are shifting, recognizing danger before it arrives. If Garcia has access to information that Jukebox doesn't, the two could naturally begin working together. Not because they're close friends at first, because their interests align. Sometimes partnerships begin with necessity before growing into trust. One of the recurring themes in Raising C is learning from other people's failures. Jukebox has watched family members make costly decisions. She's seen how revenge creates more violence. She's witnessed how pride can destroy relationships. If Garcia encourages her to slow down before making dangerous choices, he could quietly influence her future. Not by controlling her, simply by offering another perspective. That's often what real allies do. Another reason this theory feels believable is because isolation has become one of Jukebox's biggest challenges. The more isolated a person becomes, the harder it is to see situations clearly. Having even one trusted person can make an enormous difference. Not because they solve your problems, because they remind you that you're not facing them alone. Season 5 seems increasingly interested in exploring those emotional realities. One thing Raising Kanan consistently emphasizes is that actions matter more than promises. Characters constantly make promises. Very few consistently keep them. If Garcia proves himself through actions rather than speeches, Jukebox is far more likely to trust him. That's especially true given everything she's experienced. She's not looking for impressive words. She's looking for consistency. Of course, every new alliance creates new questions. If Garcia becomes close to Jukebox, how will other people react? Will Marvin approve? Will Kanan trust him? Could Rax see him as another unpredictable variable? Even positive relationships often create new complications in this world. That's part of what makes the storytelling so engaging. Nothing stays simple for long. So, here's my prediction. I don't think Garcia is secretly being introduced as the next major crime boss. I don't think he's about to replace any of the show's central characters. Instead, I think the writers may be quietly building something much more meaningful. Garcia could become one of the few people Jukebox genuinely trusts. Not because of dramatic speeches, not because of one heroic moment, but because he consistently proves that he's reliable when everyone else is becoming harder to depend on. In a season filled with betrayals, shifting loyalties, and growing uncertainty, that kind of relationship could be incredibly valuable. Jukebox is entering one of the most important stages of her journey. She's becoming more independent, more thoughtful, and more aware of the consequences of every decision she makes. Having one dependable ally beside her wouldn't make her weaker. It would make her stronger. Whether Garcia ultimately becomes that person remains to be seen. But if Season 5 continues developing their connection with the same patience it's shown so far, don't be surprised if Garcia ends up playing a much bigger role than anyone expected. Sometimes the characters who change a story the most aren't the ones leading every scene. They're the ones who quietly earn trust while everyone else is busy fighting for power. And if that's the direction Raising Kanan is heading, Garcia may become the unexpected ally that helps shape Jukebox's future in ways no one saw coming.